Hey, what is up YouTube? Kolst here bringing this emergency tier list video because there was a patch this week and there were a major set of undocumented changes made to Arena which kind of blew up the entire tier list I had, so I'm just gonna pull up the tier list I had before. This is the one I made very early in the meta. There were a few adjustments I would have made, like I probably would have dropped a mage here, I probably would have upped like priest and warrior up here, but generally speaking, this is the tier list, and the new tier list we're going to make is going to look absolutely nothing like that. So let's talk about why. Oh, and before we get too far, I want to mention that I have a giveaway running currently on my other YouTube video, the last one I uploaded. I should link it in a card up below, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel and comment on that video to be entered in that for a standard bundle courtesy of Blizzard. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is, of course, this was the patch that happened on, I believe, Tuesday, which is 26.0. This is the patch getting ready for the new Hearthstone year and also the new expansion Festival of Legends. And with this patch, I don't know exactly where it is in this patch notes, but there was a set of scheduled changes to happen, which is that the new core set the adjustments would be made. Just because of their patch schedule, they make the adjustments early. And that means all of these cards, the ones that exist in both Standard and Arena, they are different. Now, most of these are not super impactful, so I'm not going to go over them all right now. If you want, I do have a core set review video, which I will also link up there. But generally speaking, a lot of these cards are just marginally better. They're already pre-draftable cards. They just become a little bit more draftable for the most part. Nothing too significant there. So this may have a small impact on balance, but really this is not the reason I'm making this video. That is because with this patch, they also made a set, as I mentioned earlier, of undocumented changes to Arena that drastically changed the power level of a few of the classes. So with that, let's jump right into this empty tier list. And we will start by talking about the by far most strong class in Arena right now, which is back to being Death Knight. And so, of course, if you were in the March of the Lich King launch meta, you're very aware of how Death Knight was in that expansion, and Death Knight is basically back to where it was, because I have from the HS replay stats pulled up here. This is if you look at the last one day. If you look at the expansion, the reason Death Knight was not very good was because a lot of these cards like Mortician, Army of the Dead, Battlefield Necromancer, basically everything that has Discover on it, most of the corpse spending as well, these cards simply have very low offering rates, or had very low offering rates. But now if you look at the last one day, all of a sudden these cards are being given out like candy. And there were a lot of people that were saying, oh yeah, give Death Knight all their Discover back, it'll be fine, and it's not exactly going to be fine. Death Knight is back to being by far the most broken thing to ever exist in this game mode once again. Because it turns out that when you discover something like Lord Marogar, you win. It doesn't really matter what happened in the game, you just win. So that is why Death Knight is up here in the S tier. And I should probably mention as well, the drafting strategy for Death Knight pretty much goes back to what it used to be before all of the nerfs, which is that Unholy is the best because it has that best Discover, hitting both Scourge and Marogar. But you really can't go wrong with anything, but the one note is you probably don't want to just go Rainbow, because if you go Rainbow then you don't get those double rune Discover cards, so you probably want to go, a little bit into one particular direction. And with that, before we talk about some of Death Knight's closest competition, let's just talk about some of the classes whose position has not changed in this tier list. The first two we'll mention here will be Warlock and Demon Hunter. Warlock, I do believe, was previously severely underrated because it was actually pretty good if you played it as a tempo class, but a lot of people tried to play it as control when it just didn't work. But now having marginally good tempo simply does not help you against, Death Knight and some of the other top classes anymore, so Warlock is actually terrible, and Demon Hunter is very much the same. You could try to make it work by playing tempo again, but yeah, it's just not going to work right now, so I do not recommend even trying. But with that, let's move on to Death Knight's closest competition it has now, which is Paladin. Again, why is Paladin so good again? Well, Paladin, as you know, has very good cards. Let's look at the stats again. Again, we will look at total expansion, and if you look at some of the top cards here, particularly Bannerman, Bronze Explorer, Flight of the Bronze, these again were cards that were nerfed to have very low offering rate in Arena. But if you look at last one day again, have to find these cards again, but suddenly, Bannermans are given out like candy, Bronze Explorers as well, and Flight of the Bronze is also It's still a rare, so it's not as common as the others, but it is back to its normal unadjusted offering rate. So those 3 cards have a huge impact on Paladin, so that is why Paladin is able to hold its spot in the A tier. And with that, let's bounce back down to some of the classes that, again, I would not recommend so much in this meta now. The 3 I'm going to be putting in the D tier. I don't think I'm going to be talking about these all individually because just not that much has changed, and that's why they're down here. That is going to be Rogue, not Priest, Rogue, Warrior, and Shaman. Warrior, I believe, had been very good, actually very underrated in the last meta as well, but again, that was just through tempo and things that are not quite going to work quite as well anymore. So that's why Warrior is down here. Shaman just was never really that great, but it was playable. All of these classes are playable, and Rogue as well. Particularly does have some tricks, you know, they have all this random kind of stuff that could actually make a good Rogue deck compete with some of the top classes a lot better than some of the other decks, but it's just you don't have the consistency, so that's why Rogue is down here. And with that, we will talk about the 3rd highest rated class in this mode right now, and that is going to be, you know, the previous, what most people consider the top performer, which was Mage. Mage, again, I do believe had a few buffs, but for the most part, Mage has not changed. Mage still does very, very strong things. They actually did have Rune of the Archmage unnerfed, I believe, so you were a bit more likely to draft that. But generally speaking, Mage has not changed or moved too much. It is simply the fact that Paladin and Death Knight moved significantly above them. And it just generally makes so Mage is going to be a bit hit or miss. The really good mages can compete with the Death Knights and Paladins, but if you get a bad mage, it's just not going to go well for you. But with that, let's move on to filling in the last tier on this tier list, which will be the 3 remaining classes here. That is Priest, Hunter, and Druid. And I should mention there is a massive gap between these B and C tiers. So these classes are not, again, unplayable, but they are simply nowhere near the power level of the 3 top classes. Hunter, as you probably know if you follow my channel, I had rated very, very high, possibly as even the best class in the previous meta. However, one of the problems with Paladin and Death Knight, particularly being in the top 2 classes, that those are classes that have a whole lot of healing, so it just makes the Hunter game plan a whole lot harder. Hunter was so good largely because it just happened to counter Mage, which was the class everyone was picking, but that just kind of got thrown out the window, so that's a huge part of the reason why Hunter dropped so far. And Priest, as you know, Priest does Priest things. You have a good Priest, you can, again, compete with some of the top classes, especially if you happen to steal some of the really good stuff, but the thing is you're just going to have a lot less good stuff than they are, so you're still going to be at a significant disadvantage most of the time. And Druid makes a slot in this tier. Honestly, it's pretty close. I could have had Druid down here as well, but Druid is probably the best tempo class, so you do get a lot of sustain and draw, so you just have the best chance of maybe getting a board to stick and maybe pushing damage against some of the top classes, but again, you're still going to be at a pretty significant disadvantage. With that, that is it for this video. Again, don't forget to check out the giveaway that I have in the other video, and make sure you're subscribed and click the bell if you want to be notified for all of my future videos about Arena, and you'll need that to be in the giveaway as well. Oh, and I should mention that this is how the balance is probably going to be for the most part as soon as the patch launches as well. I don't expect there to be massive changes. A couple classes, like I'm definitely eyeing Druid as a class that may move up, but I would suspect that on launch, it's going to look a lot like this as well. I suspect Warlock will move up too, because they're getting a lot of really good control tools actually. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say. Thanks a lot for hanging out. I'll see you guys in the next one.